Tonight, we step into the dim batch room of a 1910s Toledo glass batch weigher, just before the day's first measured work begins. Settle in and let the rhythm come slowly. The air is cool at the doorway, yet warmer near the bins, where yesterday's dust still rests on the wooden floorboards, and the faint smell of lime, soda ash, damp burlap, and coal smoke seems to hang in the rafters like a soft grey veil. You stand there with us for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the weak morning light, and the whole room feels quieter than it truly is. Somewhere beyond the wall, the glass furnace breathes with a steady heat, and somewhere farther off, Toledo is waking under a low sky near the Maumee River. But here, in this place of scales and barrels, the 1910s Toledo glass batch weigher begins not with fire and not with molten glass, but with weight. Your hands find the edge of the bench before your mind quite does. It is worn smooth in places, rough in others, with pale powder rubbed into the grain so deeply that no broom could ever fully clear it away. The scale waits in front of you, iron-bodied and patient, with its beam, pans, poise, and notched markings made for the small acts of trust that hold a factory together. You don't make the goblet, or the bottle, or the sheet, or the lamp chimney. Not directly. You prepare the first promise of it. A glass batch is a plain-looking thing before it becomes glass. It has none of the shine people admire later. It doesn't yet catch window light, hold water, or ring gently when touched. It is sand and soda ash and limestone with old broken glass called cullet, and sometimes smaller additions that help color, clear, or correct the melt. In the batch room, these things are not poetry at first glance. They are sacks, bins, scoops, barrels, tally marks, and dust on your sleeve. Yet we can notice, softly, how much care lives inside that plainness. The sand must be dry enough to flow, clean enough to behave, and measured closely enough that the furnace men won't have to fight the mixture later. The soda ash has its own dry bite in the nose, sharper than ordinary dust, and the limestone is paler, duller, more chalk-like under the fingers. The cullet, broken from trimmings, rejects, and old glass, makes a faint clinking sound when it shifts in the bin, like a pocket full of cloudy ice. By now you have learned to hear the room before you begin. You hear the heavy quiet of filled barrels. You hear the small scrape of a scoop against wood. You hear a cartwheel somewhere outside, passing over a rough patch of street, and the murmur of men arriving in coats that smell of morning frost and tobacco. The batch house is not silent, but its sounds are work sounds, low and repetitive, each one familiar enough to become part of your breathing. The first task is not lifting, though lifting will come soon enough. The first task is reading. You look at the formula, the batch ticket, the written instruction that tells you what kind of glass is wanted today, and how much of each ingredient must be weighed. A recipe for glass may seem simple when spoken aloud, but in the 1910s Toledo works, no careful man treats it casually. Too much of one thing can trouble the melt. Too little of another can make the glass stiff, seedy, cloudy, or oddly colored. So you read it twice, as we stand beside you in the powdery light, and your thumb rests near the figures, as if holding them still. The handwriting may belong to a foreman, or to a clerk who copied from the batch book, and the paper has already softened at the corners from many hands. Sand, soda ash, limestone, cullet, perhaps a little salt cake, perhaps something for color or clearing, all written down with a practical neatness. The numbers matter. The room knows this. There is comfort in such attention. A batch weigher is not asked to hurry in the showy way. He is asked to be dependable. He is asked to let the same care pass through his hands every morning, whether rain taps at the windows or summer heat presses the powder to his skin. In this kind of work, patience isn't decorative. It is the tool beneath all the tools, the hidden one that keeps the day from going crooked. You begin with the sand. It is the body of the glass, the largest share, the thing that will become the clear substance after heat has done what only heat can do. The sand sits in its bin with a pale, dry slope, and when your scoop enters it, the surface gives way with a soft, granular sigh. The scoop has a worn wooden handle, darker where hands have held it for years. It is heavier than it looks once filled. You lift, turn, and pour into the weighing box. The grains fall in a steady stream, They make a sound that isn't quite rain and isn't quite paper being torn, but something between the two, steady and soft against the wood. Fine dust rises and catches the light. It touches your lashes and the damp places at the corners of your mouth, and you learn not to breathe too sharply over the bin. The scale responds slowly. There is a dignity to the beam as it tips, as though it dislikes being surprised. You add sand, then pause, then add a little less. You watch the pointer settle. It trembles, corrects itself, and comes near balance. Your fingers know the small finishing motion, the careful last handful, the amount that can decide whether the measure is right or merely close. In a hotter room, men may speak loudly over machinery, but here your voice would feel out of place. You may answer if someone asks a question. You may nod to the mixer man or the boy pushing an empty cart. Mostly, though, you keep to the paper, the bin, the scale, and the repeating pattern that gives the morning its shape. You are not alone, yet the work makes a quiet enclosure around you. When the sand is right, you mark it. The pencil leaves a grey line beside the item, and the line means more than it seems to mean. It means that one part of the future glass has been trusted into place. It means you can move on without carrying the first number in your mind. Such small marks are a kindness in factory work, where the body remembers much, but the paper remembers exactly. Next comes the soda ash, and you know it by more than its name. It feels lighter in the scoop than sand, yet somehow more insistent, with a dry alkaline smell that can make the nose prickle. The barrel may be lined or covered, because dampness is a nuisance, and a batch room in Toledo knows dampness well. The river, the lake air, the cold months, the thawing streets, all of them have ways of entering a building. You lift the lid and set it aside carefully. Powder clings to the rim. Your sleeve brushes it, and a pale smear appears near your cuff. This is the sort of mark a batchware carries home without noticing. It may sit on a coat, on a cap brim, in the creases of a hand, or in the seams of boots left near a door at night. Work follows quietly. The soda ash pours differently from sand. It doesn't have the same small, clean chatter. It has a muffled fall, a softness that still feels sharp in the air. You don't fling it or slap the scoop against the box. You pour with restraint, letting the powder settle before you bring your face too near the scale. Men who have worked here long enough learn such courtesies from the material itself. The formula might call for much less soda ash than sand, but it matters greatly. It helps lower the melting point of the silica, making the furnace's work possible in a practical way. Without it, the sand would resist, stubborn and unmelted beyond the useful reach of the day. Still, soda ash alone would leave the glass too soluble, too willing to be troubled by water, and so the limestone has its place as well. You may not speak of chemistry in formal words as you work. You may never use the phrases that a teacher would use on a blackboard, but your hands understand a work in chemistry, the kind learned through spoiled melts, foreman's corrections, shop talk, and years of watching what happens when a batch behaves. The factory carries knowledge in ledgers, yes, but also in wrists, backs, eyes, and caution. The limestone waits in another bin, pale and heavier, with a dull mineral smell that almost disappears unless the air is damp. It steadies the glass, it helps give durability to what would otherwise be less useful and less enduring. You bring it to the scale with the same unhurried care, and though each material looks like another kind of powder to an outsider, you know them apart by flow, sound, dust, and weight. That is one of the quiet mysteries of repetitive work. What seems identical from a distance becomes richly different up close. You notice the grain of sand against the scoop. You notice the way soda ash cakes near the bottom if the weather has turned wet. You notice the limestone's pale drag along the wood. You notice all these things not because someone asked you to admire them, but because the work has taught your senses to keep company with detail. And as the morning gathers itself beyond the high windows, the 1910s Toledo glass batchware moves from the first clean measures into the slower business of making the batch whole. The weighed materials don't belong to themselves for long. They must be gathered, combined, and made ready for the furnace, where the separate powders will surrender their names. You carry or slide the measured portions toward the mixing place, depending on the plant's arrangement, the batch size, and the habits of the room. Some work is done by hand, Some is aided by carts, chutes, hoppers, or simple mechanical mixers. But the weigher's care still stands at the beginning. You feel the pull in your shoulder after the first few movements. It is not a grand pain, not something worth announcing. It is just the body noticing the day. Your palm warms around the handle, and a trace of powder collects where your skin is damp. The floorboards answer with a low wooden creak, and the air is filled with the faint, shifting smell of minerals, old sacks, oil, and the breath of men working in coats before the room has fully warmed. In a Toledo glass plant of the 1910s, the batch room sits close to a larger world of invention and habit. The city has already become known for glass, and names connected with tableware, bottles, windows, and machines are spoken with the ordinary familiarity people use for streets and weather. Yet inside this room, the big reputation of the city shrinks down to ounces, pounds, scoops, and a balancing beam. You don't hold the city in your hands, you hold the next measure. The cullet bin gives the room a different sound. Broken glass is not powder. It has edges, colors, and small memories of what it almost became. Some pieces are clear, some are greenish or smoky. Some are rejected scraps from the works, and others may be sorted remnants that can return to the melt. When you push the scoop in, the pieces clink together with a cold, bright note, gentle but unmistakable. Cullet helps the batch melt more readily because glass that has already been made doesn't need to begin again in quite the same way. The furnace accepts it more easily than raw sand, and the whole melt can become smoother with its help when it is clean and rightly chosen. But cullet must be watched. Wrong color, dirt, metal, brick, or stray rubbish can make trouble later, and trouble later is often born from carelessness earlier. So you look. You don't stare like a man searching for treasure. You look the way workers look, with practical calm, noticing what doesn't belong. A bit of iron wire would not be welcome. A lump of brick from the furnace lining would not be welcome. A dirty shard, a foreign piece, a careless sweep from the wrong place, all these things would be set aside. In the batch room, attention is a kind of sweeping. The cullet is weighed too, and its sound against the box is lively after the hush of powders. It shifts and settles unevenly, leaving little pockets of air between pieces. You level it gently, not because it must be beautiful, but because good measuring likes an even surface. The scale beam dips, rises, and calms. Your eyes follow it with the same patience as before. By now you can feel the day's rhythm becoming familiar in your bones. Read the ticket, open the bin, fill the scoop, pour, pause, adjust, balance, mark, move the measure along, begin again. The pattern is so plain that someone passing through might overlook it. Yet you and I can rest inside it for a while, because its plainness is exactly what makes it soothing. Outside, Toledo's morning has likely grown louder. Wagons pass, boots cross wet pavement. A whistle may blow somewhere along the works, flattening itself against brick walls and smoky air, but the batch room keeps its own pace, half sheltered from the street. You hear the city as a softened thing, a distant rubbing and ringing behind the steadier sounds of your tools. There may be a boy in the room, younger than the men, assigned to fetching, sweeping, or carrying small orders. His cap sits a little too large. His hands are reddened by cold water and rough handles. He learns by watching more than by being told. You might say a few words to him now and then, not unkindly, but sparingly, because the figures on the paper don't forgive distraction simply because the conversation was pleasant. The foreman may step in to check progress. He might have a mustache whitened by dust, or a vest that has seen years of factory air. He doesn't need a long report. He looks at the ticket, the marks, the filled boxes, the state of the bins. A good batch room speaks for itself. Order is visible. Care has a shape. Your own clothing is practical and plain. A shirt with sleeves that can be rolled, trousers that have lost any sharpness they once had, strong shoes with powder caught near the stitching. In colder months, perhaps a vest or jacket stays on longer than comfort requires, because the room warms unevenly, and because the heat belongs more to the furnace side than to the place where you begin. If you have brought food, it is simple. Bread wrapped in cloth, perhaps cheese, perhaps an apple, its skin cool and slightly bruised from a pocket or tin pail, Coffee might be taken from a small container, if the day allows it, dark and bitter enough to be useful. You don't eat among the open powders if you can help it. Dust has a way of joining everything. Still, food in such a place has a quiet dignity. A man who weighs glass batch all morning learns the value of ordinary things: warm coffee, a clean handkerchief, a window cracked just enough to clear the air without inviting too much cold. These are not luxuries in the grand sense, but they are comforts, and comforts count when the day is built from repetition. The mixing of the batch is not theatrical. There is no shining transformation yet. The powders and cullet come together in dull layers, pale grey-white and broken clear, and the act of combining them seems almost too modest for what will follow. But we know, standing here in the grainy light, that the furnace cannot make good glass from carelessly prepared material. Fire may be powerful, but it isn't a cure for everything. The batch must be even. Sand and soda ash cannot remain in little kingdoms of their own. Limestone cannot sit in a stubborn pocket. Cullet cannot be heaped without regard. Whether mixed by shovel, drum, or mechanical action, the goal is steadiness throughout. The batch house teaches the same lesson again and again. A thing made well later must be handled well early. You may turn the material with a shovel, lifting from the bottom and folding it inward. The shovel blade has a scraping note against the floor or trough, duller when it meets powder, brighter when it catches glass. The motion is steady but not wild. Lift, turn, settle. Lift, turn, settle. The batch changes slowly from separate ingredients into one pale, rough, speckled mixture. Dust rises with the movement. It floats in the slanted light from the high window, making the air visible. You taste minerals faintly on the back of the tongue, and you learn to turn your face aside when the shovel drops too heavily. The room smells of dry earth and alkali, with a thread of oil from the scale and a warmer draft arriving now and then from the furnace end of the works. There is something almost restful in a task that cannot be improved by fussing. You can do it badly by rushing, and you can do it well by attending, but you cannot make it wholly by theatrics. The shovel asks only for your hands. The scale asks only for your eye. The ticket asks only that you respect what is written. This is the honesty of the batch room. By mid-morning, the light through the high windows has shifted, and the work has changed from first measures to keeping the whole room moving in the quiet order that a 1910s Toledo glass batchware must protect. The bins must be watched as much as the scale. A low bin changes the day. A damp sack changes the day. A delivery arriving late can trouble the rhythm, and a mislabeled barrel can trouble it more. You learn to notice fullness the way a cook notices flour in a pantry, or a stove tender notices coal by sound. There is no need to panic. There is only the need to see. You walk with the batch ticket in hand, or fold it into a pocket, and the paper grows softer as the hours pass. The room has corners that collect dust no matter how often they are swept. It has hooks, lids, scoops, brushes, and perhaps a ledger kept away from the dirtiest bench. A batch room is never as clean as a parlour, but it can be orderly, and order matters more here than polish. When new sacks are brought in, they carry the outside with them. Cold air clings to burlap. A trace of wagon bed, warehouse, rope, and rain may come through the doorway. You might hear the thump of a sack set down too hard, followed by the small complaint of powder settling inside it. You might glance over, not sharply, just enough to know whether it belongs where it has been placed. Labels matter. Chalk marks matter. A barrel that should be soda ash must not be mistaken for something else, simply because both are pale and dry. You don't trust appearance alone. You trust the mark, the place, the feel, the paper, the habit, and the small caution that keeps a worker from becoming careless after many easy repetitions. Familiar work is soothing, but familiarity can also lull the hand. The men who work nearer the furnace depend on this room, though they may not say so every hour. If a batch is wrong, they will know it later, when the melt doesn't fine properly, when bubbles linger, when color slips, when the glass gathers oddly, when a machine complains through poor feed, or when finished ware tells the story in flaws. By then, the batchware's morning may seem far away, but it isn't gone. It is inside the glass, So you keep your own counsel and continue. You check the scale before weighing again. You brush powder from the pan. You make sure nothing is lodged near the pivot or under the weight. A scale in a dusty room deserves small acts of respect. It is an instrument, but also a companion, and a careless man can make even a good scale lie by treating it poorly. There may be standard weights nearby, dense and dark in the hand, with their own blunt certainty. When you lift one, its coldness comes through the skin before its weight fully registers. It lands on the pan with a muted iron note. You don't toss it. You set it down. In a room where powder drifts and glass clinks, iron has a different voice. Sometimes a batch recipe is repeated so often that your body feels it before your eye confirms it. You know the likely amount of sand. You know the next barrel before you turn. You know how many scoops will bring the pointer close. But good habit doesn't mean guessing. It means the body helps while the mind remains awake enough to verify. The best routine has both memory and attention. In the 1910s Toledo works, glassmaking is already changing. Machines have begun to alter old trades. Bottles can be made with astonishing speed compared with older hand methods, and flat glass, tableware, and many kinds of factory production are being drawn into new systems of power, heat, and timing. Yet even in a changing plant, the batch still begins with measured ingredients. Modern machinery doesn't remove the need for sand to be sand, and soda to be soda, and limestone to be right. That may be a comforting thought as you work. The city may praise invention. Owners may speak of output. Engineers may study furnaces, machines, molds, and layers. But here, in this powder-soft room, progress still bends down to the scoop and scale. It still needs someone to weigh the beginning. A batch weigher may not be famous. Most people who drink from a tumbler never wonder who measured the sand. A child looking through a window pane doesn't think of limestone. Someone turning a medicine bottle in the light doesn't imagine your pencil mark on a batch ticket. But forgotten work is not empty work. It is simply work that hides inside the usefulness of things. You may pause to sweep. Sweeping in a batch room is different from sweeping a kitchen floor. The broom pushes soft ridges of powder that don't always want to gather. Dust escapes ahead of the bristles. Bits of cullet click faintly. The handle is smooth near the top and rougher lower down, and the broom's straw has bent to the habits of the floor. A man learns not to raise more dust than necessary. He learns to move the broom low and steady, not with a proud flourish. He learns where the draft from the door will lift powder, and where a corner hides small glass fragments. The sweeping itself becomes another weighing of sorts, a balancing between cleanliness and disturbance, between clearing the floor and filling the air. You might step outside for a breath when the chance comes. The yard air is cold and smoky, with the smell of coal, damp earth, horse leather, river wind, and warm brick. The plant buildings stand solid around you, their windows catching a flat morning light. Somewhere steam escapes with a softened hiss. Somewhere else, a cart backs into place with a dull bump. You breathe carefully, because even outside, the factory is in the air. Then you return. The doorway gives you back to the batch room. Your eyes settle again on pale bins, dark irons, scuffed boards, and the waiting scale. There is no drama in coming back, and that is part of the comfort. The work has not vanished in your absence. It waits without complaint, exactly where you left it, asking only to be continued. At times, you may think of the furnace beyond the wall, not as a spectacle, but as a steady appetite. It must be fed properly, not emotionally. A furnace is patient in one way and unforgiving in another. It will take what is charged into it, heat it, soften it, melt it, and reveal later whether the mixture was worthy. The batch room prepares an answer before the furnace asks the question. When the next batch ticket arrives, perhaps smudged by another hand, you don't resent it. The day is made of such arrivals. Another order, another composition, another set of measures. You read again, and the repetition deepens rather than sharpens. Your breathing falls into the length of the task, and the room's small sounds gather around you. The scrape, the pour, the balance, the mark. There is a ledger somewhere in this world, and in that ledger the day's production may become figures, tons melted, ware made, orders filled. costs watched, but your own ledger is more intimate. It is the memory of a scoop's weight, the place where your shoulder tires, the color of sand under weak light, the sound of cullet as it settles, and the feeling of getting a measure exactly right without fanfare. When the noon hour draws nearer, the room has warmed, and so have you. Powder has found the creases of your hands, your collar may feel slightly gritty. The tip of your pencil has dulled. The first neatness of morning has become working order, less clean perhaps, but alive with completed measures and the calm evidence of use. And when the midday whistle finally spreads through the works, we follow the 1910s Toledo glass batchware into the quieter pause between one half of the day and the next. The pause is not silence exactly. Factories rarely grant perfect silence, but it is a loosening. Tools are set down. The scale rests. Men move toward their food with the slow practicality of those who know the day isn't finished. You may wash your hands at a basin if water is near, rubbing at the powder that has settled into the lines of your skin, though some of it remains no matter how carefully you scrub. The water feels cold at first. Then it feels good. It darkens the dust on your wrists and makes little pale streams that run toward the basin's edge. A towel, if there is one, is already rough with use. You dry your hands and still find a trace of minerals near the nails. This is ordinary. The work has entered the small places. Your meal is taken in a corner, on a bench, outside near a wall, or wherever habit and weather allow. The bread is firm, the cheese is plain, coffee, if you have it, tastes of tin and comfort. Someone nearby may unwrap a boiled egg, or a piece of meat, or an onion wrapped so carefully that its smell still escapes. You hear low conversation, not showy, not hurried, just enough to remind everyone that men are more than their tasks. They speak of weather first, often. Weather belongs to everyone. A damp morning makes the materials troublesome. A bitter morning makes fingers stiff. A hot afternoon turns the batch room into a place where collars cling and tempers must be kept quiet. You listen, add a word, maybe smile at some small complaint that has been made 100 times before and will be made 100 times again. There may be talk of baseball, streetcars, wages, a child with a cough, a landlord, a broken shoe, a church supper, a foreman who watches too closely, or a foreman who doesn't watch enough. The world enters the factory through such talk, not all at once, not loudly. It enters in crumbs and sips, in the ordinary burdens people carry with them and set beside their lunch pails for a little while. You can imagine the light at noon in Toledo, softened by factory smoke and lake weather, falling against brick walls and pale dust. The city is not distant from the plant. It presses close with its boarding houses, streets, shops, river traffic, and the lives of families who measure the week by shifts and pay envelopes. The batchwayer's day belongs to that larger rhythm, but his hands return always to the scale. After food, there is the brief heaviness that comes when the body would like more rest than the clock allows. Your shoulders know the bench. Your eyes know the softened light. For a few minutes, perhaps, you don't think about sand, soda ash, limestone, or cullet. You think of nothing in particular, which is one of the small luxuries available even in a working day. Then the room calls you back by being itself. A cart shifts. A man stands. A lid is replaced. Someone folds paper, clears his throat, and returns to the place where the afternoon begins. There is no ceremony. The work resumes, because work resumes. That plain fact can feel almost soothing when heard from a distance, like a tide returning. Before the next weighing, you look over the area. This is when a careful batchweigher notices what the morning has disturbed. A scoop has been set in the wrong place. A lid sits slightly crooked. The floor near the cullet bin needs attention. The scale pan has collected a pale crescent of powder. You set these small things right, and by doing so you make a clean edge between morning and afternoon. Afternoon work can feel slower. The body has already spent some of its first strength. The mind must guard against drifting too far. In a batch room, drowsiness can become carelessness, and carelessness can become waste. So you create little anchors. Read the line. Touch the weight. Watch the beam. Mark the paper. The pattern keeps you awake without startling you. The glass batch itself offers no praise, but it answers good handling with readiness. A well-mixed batch flows more evenly. A properly weighed batch gives the furnace a fair chance. Clean cullet helps. Dry material helps. Correct measures help. None of this is glamorous. All of it matters. The afternoon's first order may be for a familiar kind of glass, perhaps clearware, perhaps a greenish bottle glass, perhaps some composition suited to the plant's needs that day. The exact product may be beyond your room, but not beyond your responsibility. You weigh for what will be made, even if you never see the finished piece. That is one of the strange, gentle distances inside factory life. You may imagine, as we stand with you, that each weighed batch is like a letter sent forward. You don't watch it being read. It goes to the furnace, then to the gatherer, machine, mold, layer, inspector, packer, and finally out into a world of shelves, tables, kitchens, drugstores, windows, and hands. But before all that, it sat here as a pale mixture in a box, while you leaned close to the scale. Sometimes the batch includes a small addition that asks extra care. A coloring material, a decolorizer, or a refining aid may be used in modest quantity, and small quantities have a way of demanding sharper attention than large ones. A scoop of sand can be corrected easily enough before balance. A small chemical measure may leave less room for roughness. Your movements become finer. You take the smaller container from its place. It may have a sharper smell, a darker color, or a warning in the way other men handle it. You don't make a performance of caution, you simply use it. The measure is taken cleanly, added properly, and marked. The room accepts the act into its long routine. Here again, the batch weigher's knowledge is practical. He knows which materials stain the fingers, which must be kept dry, which should not be confused, which make the foreman frown when wasted. He knows that recipe books can be guarded, that formulas may be treated almost like trade secrets, and that a glassworks carries pride in mixtures as much as in finished goods. The exact batch is the plant's memory, written in weights. Your own memory gathers around those weights. After months or years, certain batches acquire a feel, almost like familiar tunes. One runs pale and sandy, another carries more cullet and sounds brighter when moved. Another has an addition that changes the dust's color slightly, so that the shovel blade comes up tinted. You don't need to romanticize this. You only need to notice it. The room's temperature changes in the afternoon. Warmth creeps farther from the furnace side, and the dust seems to cling more easily to damp skin. If a door opens, a cooler draft passes under the heat and moves across your ankles. You can feel both at once. Warm air at the face, cool air near the floor, the mixed climate of an old industrial building. You might hear glass breaking somewhere beyond, not sharply enough to alarm, but clearly enough to remind you where the cullet begins. Factories recycle their own mistakes when they can. A flawed piece may return to the melt. A trimming may be broken and used again. There is quiet mercy in that, though no one in the room would call it mercy. They would call it good practice. A batch weigher learns that not every flaw is an ending. Some things are broken only to be made useful again. Cullet is not failure when it is clean and properly sorted. It is memory returning to the furnace. It is yesterday's rejected edge helping tomorrow's glass soften a little sooner. This thought doesn't need to be spoken. It can rest quietly inside the work. When the afternoon wore on, the noise beyond the batch room deepened, and we moved with the 1910s Toledo glass batch weigher toward the heavier rhythm of keeping pace with the furnace. The furnace does not care that men grow tired. It continues in heat, drawing the day's prepared material toward itself, and every batch charged into it becomes part of a longer melt. Your room may be cooler than the furnace floor, but you feel its demand through the timing of orders and the steady need for readiness. The batch must be waiting before it is wanted. Late preparation makes everyone conscious of time, so the afternoon becomes a matter of flow. Not hurried flow, not panic. Just the practical steadiness of keeping enough prepared mixture ahead of the next need. You weigh, mix, move, check, and prepare again. The rhythm may become almost hypnotic, and if we listen gently, we can hear how each action gives way to the next without sharp edges. The scale beam rises and falls. The scoop enters sand. Powder settles. Cullet clinks. A pencil scratches, a cart rolls away, then the scale beam rises and falls again. It would be easy, from far away, to call this monotonous, but monotony is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is a shelter, a roof of repeated acts under which the mind can soften. You may think of home during the easiest measures, not deeply enough to lose your place, just in passing. A stove, a child's shoe near a door, a wife's voice perhaps, or a mother's, or the room where you sleep after the factory has left its dust on your cuffs. Working men often carry home inside them during the day, just as they carry work home in the seams of their clothes at night. Then the next mark on the ticket brings you back. Sand, soda ash, limestone, cullet. The known sequence is a rope in the hand. You follow it. You don't need to pull hard. It leads you through. If a batch has gone wrong before, the memory of it may still live in the room. Men remember waste. They remember when glass came out troublesome, when a melt took too long, when bubbles remained, when color wandered, or when a foreman came back asking questions that no one enjoyed answering. Such memories make careful men more careful. They are lessons with dust on them, but this afternoon is ordinary, and ordinary is what we are here to feel. No great trouble comes through the door. No alarm breaks the pattern. The work is not easy exactly, but it is knowable. A knowable day can be a gentle thing when watched from the edge of sleep, because each piece belongs to the next, and nothing asks us to leap. You adjust a weight and wait for the beam to settle. Waiting is part of the work. A hurried eye may think the scale is balanced before it truly is. A patient eye lets the tremble finish. The pointer slows. The beam quiets. There you think, or perhaps you say nothing at all. You add the mark. The batch has accepted another measure. The room's surfaces have changed since morning. The bench is streaked by use. The broom leans in a new place. The air is warmer, and light has moved higher, flatter, less golden than it will be near evening. Your hands are drier now from powders and washing. The skin near the knuckles feels tight. A small nick from cullet may sting when dust touches it. You learn to respect broken glass without fearing it. Cullet can cut if handled carelessly, but most of the time it is simply another material, bright-edged and useful. You scoop with attention. You don't plunge bare fingers into a pile. You don't drag your hand along a shard. The job teaches small boundaries, and those boundaries become automatic, quiet as breathing. Someone may bring word from the furnace side that the last batch ran well. Such news is modest, but it sits pleasantly in the chest. No one applauds. The plant doesn't stop to admire correctness. Yet a good melt means your room did its part, and your part, though hidden, has weight. You may only nod, as if the news were expected. Inside, it is still good to hear. The pride of a batch weigher is not showy pride. It isn't the pride of a finished object held to the light. It is the pride of proportion, of not being the reason something failed, of knowing that a clear tumbler's first beginning was handled with steadiness. There is a peace in work whose success is partly invisible. It asks less of vanity and more of character. The afternoon brings deliveries sometimes. A wagon or rail shipment may supply sand, soda, lime, or other materials, and the movement of new stock changes the room's breath. Doors open longer. Men call out quietly. Sacks drag, thump, and settle. Barrels roll with a hollow wooden note. Fresh material has a different smell from material already warmed by the room. If sand arrives damp, it may trouble the flow. Damp sand clings. It doesn't pour as cleanly. It may need drying or special attention depending on the plant's practice. You can feel dampness before you fully see it, in the heavier scoop and the way the grains hold together. Weather has entered the batch. The city has put its thumb on the scale, gently but unmistakably. You speak to the man unloading, perhaps only to ask where the rest has been put. He answers with a shrug, or a nod toward the door, or a sentence half swallowed by the building noise. Working speech is often economical. It doesn't decorate what can be pointed to. Still, there is fellowship in these small exchanges, a recognition that each man's task leans on another's. A factory is a chain of dependencies, though no one says it that way while working. The batchware depends on the supplier, the cartman, the foreman, the scale maker, the men who keep roofs from leaking and bins from splitting. The furnace men depend on the batch. The glass workers depend on the melt. The customer depends on the wear. And somewhere, at the quiet center of it, the scale keeps asking for balance. As the light begins to soften toward late afternoon, the 1910s Toledo glass batchware turns again to the records, where the day's powders become written memory. The ledger is not romantic, but it has its own calm authority. Pages may be lined, smudged, and stiff at the edges. Figures sit in columns. Names of batches, quantities, deliveries, dates, costs, and notes may appear according to the habits of the works. You handle the book more cleanly than the shovel. Even if powder dusts the page, you don't treat it roughly. A ledger is another kind of scale. Writing after weighing has a special feel. The hand that lifted sacks now holds a pencil or pen. The fingers may seem too blunt for the neatness asked of them, but they manage. A figure is entered, a total is checked, a mark confirms completion. Here, the day's physical labor becomes something that can be reviewed tomorrow or next week, or when a question returns from the furnace room. You may wet the pencil tip or sharpen it with a knife, or rub away a mistake carefully if the paper allows. The small sound of writing is almost tender after the scrape of shovels. It pulls the mind inward. Each number settles into the column like sand settling in a box. A good column is restful to the eye. It says, the day has not slipped away uncounted. The batch records also protect memory from argument. If a melt goes wrong, men can look back. What was weighed? What arrived? Which batch was charged? Was there dampness, shortage, substitution, or a note from the foreman? The ledger doesn't know everything, but it holds what it can. In factory life, written care and hand care belong together. We can imagine your thumb leaving a pale smudge near the margin. We can imagine the page absorbing the room's dust, just as your clothing has. Years later, if such a ledger remained, it might smell faintly of paper, storage, and old mineral powder. Someone might open it in an archive and see only numbers. But we, tonight, know that each number once passed through a hand. The late day has its own sounds. Men are not finished, but they sense the far edge of the shift. Voices may soften or grow rougher with tiredness. A cart that rolled easily in the morning now seems louder. The floor feels harder through the soles. The scale still asks for the same care, and perhaps that is its quiet gift. It doesn't change its standards because you are tired. You check one batch against the ticket and the ledger. The figures agree. The boxes are ready, the lids are in place. The marked paper has become creased and familiar. You smooth it once, not because it needs smoothing, but because the hand likes to finish what it has been holding all day. Then you set it where it belongs. There is satisfaction in order at the end of a working period. It is not the large satisfaction of praise. It is the smaller, deeper kind that comes when things are left ready for the next person or for your own return. The scoop is placed where a hand will find it. The weights are arranged, the scale pan is brushed, the floor is swept enough, the room can begin again. In the 1910s Toledo glassworks, much labor is divided across many hands, and no one hand owns the final object. That can seem impersonal from far away, but from inside the work, it creates a different intimacy. You know your part. You know its boundaries. You know that a tumbler, bottle, lamp, chimney, or pane may pass into use, because many people each did a plain thing well. The batchwayer's plain thing is proportion. He gives the furnace a balanced beginning. He keeps the recipe faithful. He treats materials according to their nature. He notices dampness, dirt, shortage, and error before they can travel farther. This is not dramatic work, and that is why it suits the hour. It is humble, careful, and repetitive enough to let the mind rest against it. Outside the high windows, daylight begins to thin. The sky over Toledo may be pearl grey, or blue with smoke at the edges, or heavy with a coming rain that will darken the streets before evening. The Maumee moves beyond the factory districts with its own slow knowledge. Street lamps will be lit later, families will set tables, shoes will be placed near doors, the day will loosen its grip. But for now, you are still here. Your hand rests on the edge of the scale bench, and you feel the place where many hands have rested before yours. The wood is cool in the worn hollow and dusty along the edges. The room smells of minerals and labor. The last light shows every floating particle, each one turning slowly as if it too has nowhere urgent to go. And as evening comes nearer, we remain with the 1910s Toledo glass batchware for the small closing acts, the ones that let a factory room sleep between shifts. The closing acts begin with the kind of care that doesn't draw attention to itself, because a room left in order gives tomorrow a gentler start. You brush powder from the scale pan with slow strokes, keeping the dust low, and you watch it gather in a pale drift near the bench edge. The brush is worn down unevenly, and its bristles whisper over iron and wood, making a sound as soft as a hand moving over cloth. There is comfort in returning things to their places, especially when the day has scattered so much fine matter across every surface. You lift the small weights one by one and set them back in their proper row, each dark piece carrying a cool heaviness that feels exact in the hand. The largest weight has a dull shine along one edge, polished there by years of fingers, while the smaller ones seem almost personal, like buttons from a heavy coat. You don't count them because you distrust yourself, but because counting at day's end is part of the ritual. A missing weight would trouble the morning before it began, and so you make certain now, while the light still holds. The batch ticket is checked again, not with suspicion, but with the quiet caution that belongs to good work. Your pencil marks stand beside the lines, and the paper has become soft where your thumb has rested through the day. Sand, soda, ash, limestone, cullet, and the smaller additions have all passed from words into measures, and from measures into weighting mixtures. The Toledo glass batch weigher knows that a day's work can hide inside a few tired marks on a small piece of paper and still be complete. Outside the batch room, the furnace side of the works remains awake in a deeper way. Heat doesn't end when a man sets down his scoop. The furnace keeps its glow, the pots or tank hold their molten burden, and the men whose hours lean closer to fire continue in the orange light. You may hear them through the wall, not clearly, but as a muffled rhythm of movement, voices, tools, and the occasional low scrape of something heavy being shifted into place. The batch that you prepared does not all vanish at once. Some of it waits in boxes, barrows, or bins, ready for its turn. Some may already be on its way, carried toward the charging place, where the dry mixture will meet a heat so great that all its dry individuality will slowly loosen. You imagine it only briefly because imagining too much is not the habit of the working hour. Still, we can stand with you and feel the strange nearness between pale powder and glowing glass. A dry batch entering a hot furnace has its own life. It does not become clear glass in a single instant. It warms, settles, gives off gases, softens, foams, and slowly joins the melt already waiting there, while heat works through grains and fragments with a patience fiercer than any hand could manage. The batch weigher may not watch each stage, but he knows enough to understand that the mixture must be even before the furnace can make it whole. That knowledge stays behind the eyes, plain and steady. Your own room holds the cooler beginning of that transformation. The floor is gritty under your shoes. The window ledges are filmed with pale dust. The bins sit lower than they did at dawn, and the barrels have shifted in their circle of use. A day has passed through the place, and though nothing here looks grand, every surface tells that work has moved over it. You take the broom again and draw it along the floor in slow, careful passes. The bristles move sand, ash, lime dust, splinters of burlap, and tiny pieces of glass too small to be useful. When the broom meets cullet, there is a faint ticking sound, like small bits of ice knocking together in a basin. You don't sweep as if preparing for guests. You sweep as if preparing for another shift, another morning, another man who will need to trust where he puts his feet. Dust settles on the toe of your shoe as quickly as you clear it away. That is the nature of the batch room. No one expects it to become pure. Even so, there is a difference between honest dust and neglect, and every worker who has spent years among tools can sense that difference without needing to name it. The Toledo glass batch weigher keeps the room usable, and in such a place, usable is a kind of grace. A lid is lowered over the soda ash barrel, and you check that it sits snug against damp air. The weather can be an unseen co-worker in Toledo, especially when lake winds move inland and the river air finds cracks in brick and wood. Dampness makes powder cling, cake, and weigh strangely if a man is careless. You run your fingers along the rim, feel the powder gathered there, and wipe enough away to let the lid rest properly. The sand bin is less fussy, though it too deserves attention. Its sloped surface bears the marks of the scoop, each cut now softened by settling grains. You level part of it with the back of the scoop, not to make it pretty, but to keep the bin from spilling awkwardly at the edge. The scoop goes back with its handle turned outward, because a tired hand tomorrow will be glad to find it quickly. The limestone waits pale and quiet, with its chalky breath still in the air. You close it, brush the lip of the bin, and notice the powder whitening the lines across your knuckles. It seems almost part of you now. The hand that arrived in the morning has become the hand of the room, carrying the day's materials in every crease. Later, when you wash again, some of that whiteness will vanish, and some will remain like a faint memory. The cullet bin is checked with a different eye. Broken glass is useful, but it does not forgive bare carelessness. You look for pieces that have escaped, bright flakes near the floorboards, small shards along the path where the cart turned, and larger fragments that might cut a boot sole or catch a sweeping hand. The late light makes them easier to see when it strikes them at an angle. They wink quietly from the dust. You gather what should be gathered and set aside what does not belong. A wrong-colored piece, a dirty bit, or a shard carrying something foreign is not allowed to travel forward merely because the day is nearly done. End-of-day care can be the hardest kind, because the body wants release and the mind has already begun to drift homeward. Yet here you are, still present enough to notice the small wrong thing before it disappears into the batch. In the 1910s Toledo glassworks, this sort of attention is not likely to earn a speech. It is simply expected. The reward is not being summoned later. The reward is the furnace accepting what it is given, the melt running as it should, the room beginning again without confusion. Some kinds of satisfaction are shaped like absence, like the absence of trouble, the absence of waste, the absence of a mistake that would have had a long journey. A man from the furnace side may come by for the prepared batch, or to ask what is ready for the next charge. His face is warmer than yours, flushed by heat, and his clothing carries a sharper smell of furnace gas, coal smoke, and hot brick. When he steps into the batch room, the cooler, powdery air receives him, and for a moment you can sense the two parts of the works meeting in his body. He asks, you answer, and the exchange is simple. You point to the batch that has been completed. The box or barrow carries no elegance, only a pale mixture of materials that looks lifeless to someone who doesn't know better. The furnace man knows better. He may glance at the ticket, at the marks, at the mixture's look, and then nod. Between you there is no need for praise, because the work itself has already said what is necessary. The batch is moved away with a low creak and a shifting scrape. Cullet inside it gives a faint glassy stir. A wheel rolls over a gritty place on the floor, and the sound travels through the room after the batch has passed through the doorway. You watch only long enough to know it is safely gone, then return to the bench, because even departures leave small things behind. The batch room, after a cart leaves, has a slight emptiness. A space opens where prepared material had waited. The floor shows a rectangular pale outline where the box stood. You brush that place lightly and see the older dust beneath the newer dust, layers of the day laid over layers of other days. Industrial rooms remember through residue. They keep time in powder, scratches, stains, and worn pathways. There is no hurry now, though the shift's end is closer. The pace becomes careful in another way. Morning care prepared the work, evening care closes it. Your breathing may slow as your hands complete tasks that no longer require much calculation, and we can feel the room becoming less active without becoming empty. It is the same quiet change a kitchen makes after supper, when the last dish is washed and the stove still holds warmth. You take the ledger once more and confirm what has gone out. The pencil moves across the page with a dry, soft drag. Your handwriting may not be elegant, but it is readable, and readable is its own kind of respect. A column is added, a total is checked. A note about material received, batch sent, or stock remaining may be written in the margin, with the small restraint of a man who knows paper can outlast conversation. The numbers are written as figures in the ledger, though in our telling they move more softly as amounts, weights, and balances. So many pounds of sand, so much soda ash, so much limestone, so much cullet. Each entry is a little doorway back into the day, though only you would know how the sand sounded, how the barrel lid stuck, or how the cold came in when the delivery door opened. The ledger keeps the fact, while the body keeps the feel. You close the book, or leave it open to dry if ink has been used. If it is a pencil day, the page needs no such care, though the hand may still hover for a moment. Men often pause at the end of written work, as if listening to the page settle. Then the book is put away from the worst of the dust, and the bench becomes a work surface again, not a desk, not an office, but a plain place where judgment has passed through. Late afternoon has softened into early evening by now. The high window shows less of the sky and more of the room's reflection, faint and cloudy in the glass. It is a curious thing to work in a glass plant and see your own dim shape in a pane that others may one day use without thought. You see a powder-dulled figure, cap low, shoulders tired, hands marked by the day. The Toledo streets outside are beginning to change their sound. The working traffic has a homeward tone, cartwheels and footsteps moving with the pull of supper, streetcars sounding along their lines, and voices carrying differently as the air cools. You may not hear all of it clearly inside the batch room, but enough comes through to remind you that the factory is not the whole world. The world is waiting beyond the door, and it has lamps, kitchens, and evening smells. Still, a worker doesn't leave by vanishing. He leaves by finishing. You look once more at the scale. The beam rests level, unloaded, with a quietness that feels almost watchful. You cover it if the room uses a cover, or you place the pan so dust will be less troublesome in the morning. A well-kept scale has dignity after work, like a horse brushed down after a long pull. Your fingers trace the edge of the bench as you step away. The wood is powdered white, but beneath the dust, it has the same old dents and worn places. Some were made before you came to this room. Some may have been made by your own careless setting down of a weight, or by a shovel handle leaning too hard, or by a box dragged across in a hurried hour. Work leaves marks, and those marks become part of the furniture of trust. A younger helper may still be sweeping near the far side. You tell him, perhaps, to mind the cullet near the doorway, or to set the broom where it belongs when he is done. The advice is plain, almost nothing, but such small instructions are how shops teach themselves across years. No manual can carry every little caution, so workers pass them quietly, one phrase at a time. He nods and keeps sweeping. The broom catches a patch of stubborn powder, and he presses too hard at first, raising more dust than he clears. You might have done the same when you were new. Most workers learn by doing a thing wrong in a small way, then learning the better motion from someone who has made the same mistake before. The room is patient with small errors, as long as they are noticed. The air near the floor grows cooler as evening deepens. Heat remains above, under the rafters, but around your ankles the draft has begun to gather. This layered temperature is familiar, and you dress for it by habit more than thought. You may pull your sleeves down, shake powder from your cuffs, and feel the dry scratch of fabric against skin that has spent the day among minerals. Before you leave, there may be one last conversation with the foreman or clerk. The words are practical. What batch is ready? What stock is low? What came in damp? What must be ordered soon? It is not a long talk, and no one stretches it for pleasure, but there is a calm usefulness in getting the next day straight before the present one closes. Tomorrow's work is lighter when today's memory is still warm. You mentioned the soda ash lid, perhaps, or the sand that came a little damp, or the cullet that needs sorting before morning. The foreman listens while looking at the room, because men in factories often listen with their eyes as much as their ears. He may grunt, nod, or make a note. That is enough. The matter has entered the chain of attention. The job of the 1910s Toledo glass batchware is full of these small handoffs. Material to measure, measures to mix. Mixed batch to furnace, facts to ledger, warnings to the next man. Nothing exists entirely alone. Even the dust travels from sack to scoop, from scoop to bench, from bench to sleeve, from sleeve to the washwater, and from there into some unseen drain beyond your knowing. And then, at last, you prepare yourself to leave the batch room. You don't become clean all at once. You remove what can be removed. You slap dust gently from your trousers, not too hard. because the air has had enough of dust today. You wash again if water is available, working at the palms, wrists, and nails, and the cold water brings the skin back to itself. A small mirror, if one is present somewhere near the washing place, might show powder at your temple, pale along an eyebrow, or settled in the crease beside your nose. You wipe it with a damp cloth and leave some behind. There is often some left behind. It will appear later on a pillowcase perhaps, or in the wash basin at home, another faint sign that the glassworks followed you out. The coat you put on smells different from the room at first, then quickly begins to belong to you again. Wool, street air, tobacco, old rain, and factory dust mingle in it. You settle it on your shoulders and feel the tired places underneath. The body has become heavier since morning, but not defeated. It has simply been used. You step toward the door, and the batch room changes as you move away from the center of it. The scale is no longer in front of you. The bins are at your side, then behind you. The high windows hold only a grey suggestion of evening. The room that was your whole world for the shift becomes a room you can leave, and that leaving is part of the rhythm too. At the threshold, you may look back. Many workers do this without making a habit of admitting it. A glance is enough. The tools are placed, the bins are closed, the floor is passable. The paper is marked. The prepared batch has gone forward, and the remaining stock waits in its own quiet order. The room doesn't thank you, but it doesn't need to. It is ready. Outside, the cooler air touches your face with a softness that feels larger than the room. The yard smells of damp ground, coal smoke, warm brick, and the river's far breath. A whistle has faded, or perhaps another sounds from a different building, and the factory district moves through the hour when day labor and evening labor briefly overlap. Men pass in both directions, some going home, some coming in, their lunch pails and coat collars marking the exchange. You walk with the others, but the batch room stays inside your senses for a little while. The sound of sand pouring repeats faintly in memory. The balance beam still seems to hover behind your eyes. Your hands remember the scoop's handle. Your nose still carries soda ash, lime dust, old burlap, and the cold brightness of cullet. Work does not end exactly when the door closes. It fades by degrees. A streetcar may be waiting, or a walk may take you through familiar blocks where houses stand close enough to hear supper plates being set down. Toledo in the 1910s is a city of working sounds, and at evening those sounds soften into domestic ones. Factory boots on pavement, a horse stamping near a curb, a bicycle bell, a child calling from a porch. Somewhere the smell of onions, coal smoke, and bread drifts into the street. You carry your pay not daily perhaps, but in the knowledge that the week is being earned one careful measure at a time. The day's labor has entered the body as tiredness, and it has entered the glassworks as prepared batch, ledger marks, and materials ready for heat. Such work doesn't need to be admired to be real. It only needs to be done. At home, if we follow gently but not too closely, the batch weigher may remove his boots near the door. Powder falls in small pale traces. Someone may notice and sweep it later, or he may tap the soles outside before entering, depending on household rules and habit. Work dirt has a way of being both tolerated and resented, because it is proof of wages and nuisance together. In a working home, both truths can sit at the same table. Supper might be simple and warm. The hands that held the scoop now hold a fork, a cup, a piece of bread. The shoulders that lifted materials settle under lamplight. Conversation may move around the day's edges without entering every detail. Not every worker explains his shift at length. Sometimes a day of careful measuring becomes only a few words, and the listener understands enough. If asked how the day went, he might say it went all right. That phrase can hold many things. It can hold the damp sand, the good batch, the powder in the cuffs, the foreman's nod, the bright cullet near the doorway, and the satisfying moment when the scale rested level. People who work steadily often compress whole rooms into small answers. They have lived the rest already. Later, sleep may come with the body's own heaviness. The hands may twitch once with remembered effort. The lungs may still feel the room's dry air. In the dark, the mind may replay a scale beam settling, a pencil mark being made, a lid being closed, or a broom passing over floorboards. These are not grand images, but they are orderly ones, and orderly images can carry a tired person toward rest. And while the batchweyer sleeps, the glassworks is not entirely sleeping. The furnace continues. The batch he measured may be softening, melting, clearing, and joining the larger pool of glass, while men on other hours tend heat and motion. The work has passed from his hands, but it has not disappeared. It is glowing now, beyond his sight, becoming something he may never hold. The next morning will find the room again. It always does. The bins will wait under a new light. The scale will ask the same question. The floor will need sweeping. The ticket will carry another set of measures. The batchweyer will return, and with him will return the quiet skill of beginning again without needing the day to be new. In every way, there is a particular peace in repeated beginnings. You don't have to wonder who you are in the room. You are the one who weighs. You are the one who checks the formula, minds the materials, listens to the scale, and lets the glass begin correctly. The world beyond may change quickly, but here, for the length of the shift, sand still needs weighing, soda ash still needs care, and limestone still waits pale beneath its lid. Morning comes with grey light and cold edges. The batch room feels almost untouched for a few moments, as if the evening's order had preserved it under a thin layer of stillness. Then the first steps enter, a door opens, air shifts. A cart complains softly. The day begins not with brightness, but with use. You come in carrying yesterday's knowledge and a body only partly rested. The room greets you through smell before sight, dry minerals, old wood, burlap, oil, and a trace of furnace warmth. You remove your coat or keep it a little longer, depending on the cold. Your fingers test the morning by touching the bench, and the wood tells you what the air has been doing overnight. The first look is a survey. You see whether anything has been moved. You see whether the lid's held. You see whether dampness crept in or a draft left powder where it shouldn't be. You see whether the scale rests clean enough to begin. The mind may still be waking, but the worker's eye wakes quickly when it belongs to a familiar place. A new ticket waits. Perhaps the handwriting is neater than yesterday's. Perhaps worse. The formula may be the same, and if it is, a small part of you is grateful. Repetition reduces the need for surprise. Yet you read it carefully all the same, because a familiar line can carry an unfamiliar number, and an old habit can trip a man who moves too confidently. The 1910s Toledo glass batchware starts again with sand, because beginnings often return to the largest and plainest thing. The scoop enters the bin, grains slide and settle. The sound is soft, almost like dry shoreline under a slow foot. You lift, and the weight arrives through your wrist, forearm, shoulder, and back, connecting the material to the body in a single practical line. The sand pours into the box and makes a low mound. You add more. The scale beam lowers. Dust moves into the light like faint breath. It is early enough that no one speaks much. A man's silence in the first hour isn't unfriendly. It is simply the mind finding its path through the work again. The measure comes close. You slow down. The last edition is smaller, guided by memory but governed by the beam. A little too much sand can be removed, but it is better not to overshoot if you can help it. You watch the pointer tremble, and in that trembling there is the whole quiet art of the job. Not guessing, not rushing, waiting until balance declares itself. There, the first measure is right. You mark the paper. The mark is small, but the day has crossed from intention into action. The batch is no longer only a recipe. It has begun to exist. The next material waits, and then the next, and the rhythm opens like a road you've walked in darkness and daylight both. Soda ash, pale and dry, limestone, dull and steady, cullet, bright and irregular. Each one moves from storage to scale to mixture, and each one carries a different sound into the morning air. We stay with you as the repetition begins to settle around us, not as boredom, but as shelter. A plant's larger machines may receive more attention from visitors. People like to look at fire and moving parts. They like to admire speed, heat, and clever mechanisms. But the batch room's intelligence is quieter, and perhaps more easily missed. It is the intelligence of proportion, cleanliness, order, and memory. It is the patience of making sure the beginning is worthy of the end. Some mornings bring a special kind of cold, the kind that makes metal sting. The iron weights feel almost damp with chill when you lift them, and the scale itself seems slower, though perhaps that is only your fingers. Breath shows near the doorway when men come in from outside. Burlap sacks are stiff, a cap is pulled low, even powder seems quieter in cold air. On such a morning, the warmth from the furnace side feels almost kind when it passes through the wall or under a door. Not enough to heat the whole room, but enough to remind you of the living fire nearby. The batchweyer works in the borderland between cold raw material and the furnace's steady appetite. He belongs neither fully to the outdoor chill nor fully to the glow, but to the measured space between them. You learn where to stand, so the draft doesn't take the dust straight into your face. You learn which bin lid sticks when the air is damp. You learn how a wooden scoop changes with seasons, swelling slightly, drying again, taking on the weather as surely as a door does. These small lessons are not written on the ticket. They live in the body, patient and exact. There may be a window near the upper wall, clouded by dust and weather, through which the morning light arrives without much enthusiasm. It falls across the floating powder, across the scale beam, across the edge of the bench, and across your hand as you level a measure. Light, in a batch room, is not decorative. It is useful. It shows the dust, the marks, the uneven surface, the shard that shouldn't be there. As the morning steadies, the room grows more awake. Another worker passes behind you. A cart is brought in. Someone coughs, then laughs softly at himself. The broom knocks against a wall. A lid is lifted and set down. None of it breaks the calm, because all of it belongs to the same working music. The batch room has many small instruments, and almost none of them were made to be musical. A fresh delivery of cullet may arrive, and with it comes the bright, cold sound of broken glass settling into its place. The pieces may have come from the plant's own rejects, trimmed edges, or returns sorted for use. They carry color in a subdued way even when they are meant for clear glass, because thickness and broken edges catch light differently. You look through them as much as at them, noticing cleanness, shade, and stray material. Sorting cullet is not glamorous, but it is one of those tasks that protects everything downstream. A bit of ceramic, metal, dirt, or wrong glass can travel farther than anyone would like. So you and the helper look, turn, and separate. The sound is light but sharp, and the fingers remain careful. You might use a small rake, scoop, or gloved hand, depending on what is available and how the pieces lie. A shard flashes near the surface. You set it aside because it carries something stuck to it. Another piece is fine and stays. You don't narrate each decision aloud. The room would become tiresome if every small judgment demanded speech. Work of this kind happens mostly below language, in the trained glance, the restrained hand, the willingness to pause for a second before letting something pass. The batchwayer's job includes trust, but not blind trust. He trusts the supplier enough to use the material, yet checks it enough to protect the batch. He trusts the formula enough to follow it, yet reads it carefully enough to catch a copied error if one appears. He trusts his hand enough to work steadily, yet trusts the scale more than his own confidence. This layered trust is one of the quiet arts of industrial work. By mid-morning, the repeated weighing has changed the room again. Powder marks have returned to the bench. The sweep of the broom from yesterday is no longer visible in the busy places. Your cuffs are pale. Your throat is aware of dust, and you drink water when you can. The water tastes metallic from the cup, and it feels plain and good going down. There is a moment when the sun, if the day is clear, comes high enough to strike one corner of the cullet bin. The broken glass brightens suddenly. Not dramatically, not like jewels in a story, but with a modest scatter of light that catches the eye before you look away. In a glassworks, beauty often appears by accident while everyone is busy making something useful. You see it, and then you return to the scale. The formula may shift after that. Another batch, another type. Perhaps the works needs a slightly different composition for a different line of wear. The change asks you to reset your attention. You clear the previous ticket away, place the new one where it can be read, and allow the old rhythm to become new in its details. Sand again, yes, but not the same amount. Cullet again, perhaps, but not the same share. Such variation keeps routine from becoming sleep inside the working day. For the listener, it may be soothing to hear the names return, but for you in the room, each return carries enough difference to require care. A scale doesn't know whether the worker is bored. It only tells the truth if treated properly. You treat it properly because the batch deserves that, and because the men after you deserve it too. The plant beyond the batch room moves in larger cycles. Furnaces are heated and maintained. Glass is formed, cooled, inspected, packed, and sent away. Repairs are made when they must be made. Orders rise and fall. The city talks of business, wages, prices, and machines. Yet the batch room reduces all that motion to the question of what goes in first, and in what amount. There is a humility to that question. It does not seek applause. It simply waits at the root of everything. Before transparency, before shape, before the finished rim of a tumbler or the smooth side of a bottle, there is a pale, dusty mixture weighed by hand and eye. Before the gleam, there is the grey. And as the second morning moves toward its middle, we stay beside the 1910s Toledo glass batch weigher as the plainness of the job begins to reveal its deeper calm. The deeper calm is not something you would name while standing there, because naming it would feel too large for such a dusty room. It arrives instead through repetition, through the way your hand reaches for the scoop before thought is fully formed, and through the way the scale beam becomes almost as familiar as your own breathing. You begin to understand that the day is not made of one task, but of many small returns, each one asking for the same careful attention. The sand returns first in the mind because it is plentiful, pale, and patient. It sits with the plainness of ground stone, though it holds the possibility of transparency within it. You may not think of that possibility often, but it is there, hidden in every scoop you lift. The grains slide against one another with a dry murmur, and when they pour from the scoop, they make a little slope that collapses softly at the edges. Your body knows where to place its feet. One foot braces near the bin, the other shifts when the load grows heavy. Your shoulder rises, turns, and lowers, and the movement becomes so practiced that it feels less like separate labor than like a slow machine made of muscle and habit. Yet, you are not a machine, and the small choices remain yours, especially in the last careful handful before the balance settles. In the 1910s Toledo batch room, the formula may be guarded by office men, foremen, and old habit. But the formula alone cannot make glass. It needs a worker who can turn written amounts into real amounts, without letting dust, weariness, dampness, or distraction steal accuracy from the day. We stand near you and hear the pencil touch paper again, a soft grey scratch that says another measure has crossed from instruction into fact. A helper may ask a question from behind you, and you answer without turning too quickly. He wants to know whether the next barrow is for the same batch or the other one. You glance at the ticket, then at the chalk mark, then at the barrow itself, because one answer from memory is not as safe as 3 confirmations from the room. Your reply is quiet, practical, and short enough to leave the rhythm undisturbed. The room teaches this kind of speech. It is not unfriendly, it is merely shaped by weight and dust. Words must leave space for listening, and listening in a batch room includes more than voices. You listen for the hollow sound of an emptying barrel, the wrong scrape of metal where wood should be, the brighter tick of glass underfoot, and the faint unevenness in a cartwheel that may spill powder if ignored. Around mid-morning, the batch house smells different from dawn. The first chill has loosened, and the powders seem warmer, more awake, though the change is slight. There is a dry mineral scent, a soft bite from soda ash, a dull chalkiness from limestone, and under all of it the familiar odor of old boards that have held years of industrial dust. You notice these things without pausing, because they are part of the room's weather. A door opens, and outside air enters in a low stream across the floor. It brings a passing trace of horse, damp street, coal smoke, and perhaps the river's cold breath. The powder near the doorway stirs lightly, as if the room has taken in a small thought from the city. Then the door closes, and the batch room returns to itself, enclosing you again in its pale, measured world. The next batch asks for more cullet. You know it before your muscles do, because the ticket has told you, and the sound of the work changes accordingly. Cullet does not slide like powder. It shifts in broken planes with a quiet clatter that can seem bright even in a dim room. When you scoop it, pieces settle against the metal or wood with little glassy taps, and the weight is irregular in the hand. You bring it to the scale carefully. Broken glass has corners that catch, edges that resist the easy flow of sand, and small surprises that make a man respect it. The measure must still be right, though it behaves differently from the powders. You level it gently, enough to know what rests on the pan, but not so much that shards leap or scatter. The scale lowers, pauses, and receives the uneven load. A small piece drops near your shoe. You hear it before you see it. It lands with a tiny, clear note that separates itself from every other sound in the room. You bend, pick it up with caution, and return it where it belongs if it is clean. Such moments are barely moments at all, yet they keep the day tidy and they keep the path safe for the next pair of boots. The Toledo glass batchware knows that broken glass has two futures. It can become trouble or it can become help. In the wrong place it cuts, contaminates, or confuses. In the right place, clean and correctly measured, it eases the furnace's work and returns yesterday's fragments to tomorrow's usefulness. This is one of the gentler lessons of the batch room, though no one may ever put it that way. You move the weighed cullet toward the mixing place. It gleams faintly under dust, not bright like polished ware, but dimly, as if remembering light. The pieces may once have been the edge of a sheet, the failed lip of a vessel, or the trimmed remnant of some earlier making. Now they wait inside a rough mixture, not special, not displayed, but included. The mixing begins again, with shovel, trough, box, or mechanical turn, depending on the equipment set up for that room and that batch. You lift from the bottom and fold towards the middle, making the heavy and light parts meet. The sound is layered. Powder hushes, glass clicks, wood creaks. Your breath moves through your nose carefully, and your shoulders begin the slow complaint that belongs to repeated lifting. Yet the motion has a calming order. Lift and fold. Draw back and settle. Lift again, a little to the side. The pale materials lose their separate look, though not completely, and the batch becomes a speckled thing that is neither sand, nor ash, nor limestone, nor cullet, but a prepared beginning. The work is plain enough to watch half asleep, and exact enough to deserve respect. A man may pass by carrying a tool from another part of the works, and for a moment the batch room opens onto the wider factory. You see heat on his face, sweat darkening his collar, and black dust near his cuffs. He looks at your pale dust. You look at his darker marks, and without saying much, each of you recognizes a different climate of the same industrial world. His work burns closer to fire. Yours begins nearer earth. By noon, your hunger arrives slowly, not as a sharp demand, but as an emptiness under the ribs that has been waiting politely. You finish the measure you are on, because stopping midway would leave the mind holding too much. Then you mark the paper, set the scoop aside, and let the room's rhythm loosen a little around you. The scale rests, and so do your hands. The meal, when it comes, tastes stronger because of the dust. Bread has its own sweetness. Cheese has salt. Coffee has bitterness and warmth, even if it has cooled in the tin. You eat without hurry, listening to the sounds of other men eating, speaking, shifting on benches, and clearing their throats. The factory does not become domestic at noon, but it borrows a small portion of household peace. Someone speaks of the weather moving in from the west. Someone else says, the streets were slick before dawn. Another man mentions a cousin at another works, or a streetcar delay, or the price of coal, and the talk drifts as lightly as powder, settling here and there without needing to become a story. You listen more than you speak because your morning has been full of small measurements, and silence now feels useful. The Toledo of the 1910s lives behind these ordinary conversations. It is a city of river, rail, factory yards, smoke, churches, shops, boarding rooms, and family kitchens, all connected by the daily going out and coming back of workers. The glass industry is part of its public face, but in the lunch hour it becomes private again, contained in worn hands, dusty sleeves, and lunch pails set beside tired feet. We can feel that world in the pause. After the meal, The return to work is gentle but complete. There is always a moment when the body resists standing. Then the habit of the shift takes over. You fold the cloth around what remains, close the pail, brush crumbs from your lap, and return to the bench. The scale has not moved. The ticket still waits. The room has held your place. The afternoon's work begins with checking what morning left unfinished. You look at the prepared batch, the remaining materials, the marks on the paper, and the state of the floor. A worker who steps back into a task without looking is trusting luck too much. You do not make a show of checking. You simply let your eye travel, and the room offers what it knows. Perhaps the sand stock is lower than you would like. Not empty, but low enough to mention before it becomes a problem. You make a note, or tell the proper man, because shortage rarely announces itself at a convenient time. A batch room kept well is partly a room where tomorrow's inconveniences are softened today. You cannot remove all trouble, but you can reduce the number of surprises. The next weighing is smaller, a correction or addition that asks finer attention. Smaller measures can slow the day more than large ones because they require the hand to become less broad. You use a smaller scoop perhaps, or add by careful pinches from a container, watching the scale respond in tiny movements. The beam seems to breathe. Your own breath follows it. A fine addition may be meant to alter color, improve clarity, or help the melt release bubbles. The exact material depends on the glass being made, and each plant has its own formulas, habits, and guarded preferences. You may not know the whole reason in formal words, but you know the instruction. You know the container. You know that small things measured wrongly can make large consequences. This is one of the places where the batch weigher's humility matters. He does not need to invent the batch. He needs to honor it. There is skill in following well, especially when following requires attention, memory, judgment, and restraint. In a world that often praises the visible maker, the quiet keeper of proportion remains behind, letting the final object shine without his name attached. The afternoon light grows flatter. It presses through dusted glass and turns the room the color of old paper. The shadows under the bins deepen, and the powder on the floor seems less white, more gray. You feel heat in your back when the furnace side door opens, then coolness when the outer door admits air. The building is always breathing through its cracks, doors, walls, and work. A cart arrives for another prepared batch. Its wheel gives a small knock each time it turns, and the sound is familiar enough that you know which cart it is before seeing it. The man pushing it leans with practiced weight, not wasting motion. You help guide the box into place. Powder shifts, the cart settles, the floor creaks, then the batch is loaded, moved, and sent onward. For a moment, you watch the doorway after it leaves. It is not sentiment. It is habit. You want to be sure nothing spills, nothing catches, nothing is left behind where it shouldn't be. Then your gaze returns to the room. A worker's attention is like a lantern with a narrow beam, moving from one practical object to the next, lighting only what needs doing. There is peace in that narrowness. The batch room has its small discomforts, and we should not polish them away. Dust dries the throat, heavy lifting tires the back. Alkali can bother the skin. Broken glass needs care. A damp day makes material stubborn, and a hot day makes every motion slower. But the calm of the work does not depend on pretending it is easy. It comes from feeling how people made a livable rhythm inside difficulty. You may wrap a cloth around your hand before handling a rough edge. You may turn your face before a powdery pour. You may rest a sack against your thigh before shifting its weight. These are not dramatic protections, only learned accommodations between body and task. Over time, a worker gathers hundreds of them, and together they become the difference between enduring the day and being worn down too quickly by it. The foreman returns in the later afternoon, looking over the prepared orders. He stands with one hand near his waistcoat, perhaps, and another holding a paper that has already been folded too many times. His questions are brief. You answer with the batch numbers, the stock remaining, and whether any material behaved poorly. The conversation is factual, but not cold. Both of you are trying to keep the same invisible line straight. He may mention that the furnace men want the next batch ready sooner, and the room tightens around that request without becoming frantic. You know what can be hurried and what cannot. You can move steadily. You can skip no measurement. You can have the helper bring the next barrow closer, set lids aside properly, and clear a path. But you cannot make the scale truthful by rushing its balance. So the afternoon becomes more focused. The scoop enters the sand with a firmer rhythm. The soda ash is poured without waste. The limestone is brought up in clean additions. Cullet is checked and weighed. Its bright sound slightly louder now because everyone is listening for progress. We remain beside you as the room works a little more quickly, yet still within the same soft boundaries of care. A long sentence lives inside such a moment, though no one says it. The furnace is waiting. The men beyond the wall are timing their own motions. The batch ticket must still be honored. The scale must still settle. The materials must still be mixed evenly. And your tired hands must still remember that accuracy is not an ornament added after speed, but the thing speed must never break. That is the work. That is its center. The batch is completed. You mark the paper, and the pencil leaves a darker line because your hand bears down slightly with fatigue. The prepared mixture is moved toward the waiting cart. Powder puffs softly at the edge. Cullet shifts. The helper steadies one side. You nod to him, and together the small transfer is made without spill or sharp word. There is relief in that. Not celebration, just the easing that follows a task completed cleanly under pressure. The room seems to exhale with you. The foreman may already have moved on. The furnace men will receive what they asked for. The batch ticket, worn and smudged, has served its purpose again. You place it with the others and let your hands fall still for the length of one breath. As late afternoon leans toward evening, the 1910s Toledo glass batch weigher begins to feel the day collecting not only in the room, but in the body itself. The shoulders are aware of every lifted scoop. The fingers feel dry around the nails. The lower back asks for a different posture. Your eyes, which have watched the fine tremble of the scale so many times, welcome the simpler task of looking across the room. The last measures are often the ones that test a worker's steadiness most gently. Nothing dramatic happens. That is exactly the danger. The mind, seeing the end nearby, begins to leave early, wandering towards supper, street sounds, warm water, a chair, or the quiet privacy of being out of factory air. The body remains at the bench. The mind must be invited back. You invite it back with the ticket. You read the line again. You place the weight. You pour slowly, not because you are slow by nature, but because the end of the day deserves the same truth as the beginning. There is a dignity in finishing well. The room may not notice, but the work will. A small mistake caught now becomes only a pause. A small mistake missed now becomes someone else's trouble. You know this, not as a slogan, but as a fact, learned from industrial days where causes and consequences may be separated by walls, hours, and different men's hands. So you catch what you can while it is still near. That is part of the kindness of careful labor. The final batch of the shift may be simpler, or it may not. Either way, you do not argue with it. The formula is the path. Sand first in its proper amount, soda ash in its proper amount, limestone in its proper amount, cullet, clean and weighed, additions as written. Mix until the materials lose their separate stubbornness. Prepare it for the heat that will take over after your part is done. By now the room's colors have faded into muted browns, whites, grays, and dull iron. The day has left no bright thing except the occasional glint from cullet and the pale strip of sky in the upper window. Yet these subdued colors feel restful. They do not demand anything from the eye. They simply remain soft with dust, worn with use, and honest under the evening light. You make the last mark. The pencil point breaks a little, or maybe only dulls against the paper. You look at it, turn it once in your fingers, and decide it can finish the line. Such tiny judgments are everywhere in a working day. Replace it now or later. Sweep now or after the cart leaves. Mention the low stock now or when the ledger is open. Work is made of decisions too small to remember unless one of them goes wrong. The prepared batch waits for pickup, and for a few minutes the room is between tasks. This is a delicate kind of quiet. Not rest exactly because you still stand in the shift. Not labor exactly because the heaviest lifting has paused. It is the in-between state of a workshop nearing closure, when tools still lie warm from use and the air still carries the day's motion. You use those minutes well. A lid is straightened. A scoop is wiped. The scale pan is cleared of powder. The barrow path is checked for cullet. You tell the helper to bring the broom, and his footsteps cross the boards with the dragging sound of someone as tired as you are. He hands it over, or starts at the far wall, and together you begin returning the room to order. Sweeping at day's end feels different from sweeping at mid-morning. It has more conclusion in it. The broom gathers what the day has shed, and the little ridge of powder it pushes before it seems like a pale record of hours. Sand, ash, lime, dust from sacks, small chips of glass and dirt from boots all come together in a humble line. The room gives up its loose edges. You move slowly enough not to wake too much dust. The bristles rasp over floorboards, then soften over powder, then click when they catch a shard. A cart passes outside, and the sound fades down the corridor. Somewhere beyond, a whistle or bell marks time for another part of the works. Inside the batch room, the broom continues, and its rhythm is almost like breathing through straw. When the cart comes for the final prepared batch, you are ready. The man pushing it looks tired too. Everyone is a little more economical in the evening. The box is shifted, lifted, or slid into place with care. The mixture moves as one dull mass, though within it are all the separate things you measured. It leaves the room slowly, and the floor shows its pale outline behind. You brush that outline away. Not completely, because nothing in the batch room is complete in that sense, but enough. The spot joins the floor again. The door swings once, and a final faint trail of dust hangs in the air. You watch it drift, and then it settles, as all the other dust has settled, into the long memory of the place. Evening in a factory does not fall like evening in a field. It gathers among brick walls, window glass, steam pipes, bins, carts, and doorways. It sits on iron and wood. It cools the outer rooms while the furnace holds its core of heat. It changes voices, making them lower and more inward. The Toledo glassworks seems to become both larger and quieter as the light withdraws. The batch weigher's own leaving begins again with records. You enter the last batch, note what remains, and check the stock that will matter tomorrow. The ledger page receives the day without surprise. It has received many days before this one. If a small smear crosses the margin, you rub it lightly and continue. Perfection is not required. Legibility is. A column of amounts tells a story only to those who know how to read it. It says which batches were prepared, which materials were used heavily, which supplies are nearing their lower edge, and whether the day has kept faith with the furnace. To a visitor, it may be dull. To the works, it is memory. To you, it is the last quiet weighing of the day, where labor becomes written balance. The ledger closes with a soft flattening of pages. You set it aside where dust is less likely to claim it overnight. Then you look at the scale again. It is strange how an object can become almost companionable through use. The scale has not spoken, yet it has answered you all day. It has corrected confidence, rewarded patience, and held the line between enough and too much. You clean around it with care. Powder hides near the base, along the edge, beneath the places fingers do not easily reach. You remove what you can, not because the room will stay clean, but because tomorrow deserves a fair beginning. That thought returns often in steady work. Tomorrow deserves a fair beginning. The next man deserves a fair beginning. Your own tired future self deserves one too. The helper finishes his side of the room and leans on the broom for a moment. You don't scold him if the work is done. He is learning the length of a day, and some lessons enter through the soles of the feet, more than through advice. You point to a mist patch near the cullet bin. He sees it, nods, and sweeps it properly. That is enough. A final look over the bins. Sand covered or left as the room requires. Soda ash protected from damp. Limestone closed. Smaller containers secured. Cullet kept where it belongs, with stray pieces gathered away from the path. The batch tickets placed where they won't be confused. The weights back in order. The broom returned. Each small act is like lowering a lamp inside the room. You may wash at the basin, and this time the water darkens quickly as it runs over your hands. It finds the powder in the lines of the palms, the grey near the nails, and the pale dust along the wrist where the shirt cuff rode up. The skin beneath feels tender and cool. You rub carefully, rinse and dry with a rough towel that seems to have absorbed half the factory across many days. There is still dust in the creases. There always is. You accept that with the mild resignation of a worker who knows the difference between clean enough and impossible. The smell of soda ash has faded, but not vanished. The back of your throat feels dry. Your shoulders relax only after the hands are done washing, as if the body has waited for that small ceremony before admitting the shift is over. You put on your coat. The fabric feels heavier than morning, perhaps because you are heavier within it. A cap is taken from its peg or bench. A lunch pail is lifted. The room, now mostly set to rest, stands behind you in its pale order. It will not be empty long in the life of the works, but for this moment it feels held, quiet, and almost sleeping. At the door, the air changes. You pass from mineral dust into the broader factory smell of coal smoke, hot brick, oil, damp clothing, and evening. The corridor or yard carries other footsteps, some hurried, some slow. Men speak in low voices, saving their fuller voices for home, or perhaps having spent them already among machinery. You join the movement without needing to announce yourself. The Toledo evening receives you with a cool hand on the face. The sky is low and dim. If there has been rain, the ground reflects factory windows in broken patches. If the weather is dry, dust follows boots into the street. Either way, the city seems to know this hour well. The hour when workers emerge carrying invisible rooms with them, each man trailing the smell and rhythm of his own place of labor. You walk away from the batch room, but not entirely. Your hands still remember the scale. Your ears still hold the soft fall of sand. The cullet's small clink has become part of the inner quiet. Even the pencil marks seem to remain somewhere behind the eyes, each one a small assurance that the day was measured and found complete. A streetcar bell sounds in the distance, softened by brick and evening air. Someone laughs near the gate, tired but genuine. A wagon wheel strikes a rut and moves on. The glassworks behind you continues in heat, because industry does not sleep all at once. Somewhere inside, the batch you weighed is changing, no longer powder, not yet finished glass, but passing through its own slow transformation. That thought may follow you down the street. It is a gentle thought. The work has gone beyond you now. The materials have entered the furnace, and the furnace has begun its long persuasion. Sand that was dry under your scoop is softening. Cullet that rang under your hand is losing its edges. Limestone, soda ash, and all the smaller additions are entering the common melt. You do not need to witness it for it to be true. Much of life is like that, especially in quiet work. We prepare things we do not see completed. We measure beginnings. We leave rooms ready. We trust that the next part of the process will take what we have done and carry it onward. For the batch weigher, this is not philosophy first. It is simply how the shift works. The homeward walk continues. Houses gather along the street, or boarding rooms, shops, and small lit windows. The smell of supper grows stronger where doors open. Coal stoves breathe. Wet wool steams near warm rooms. Children call from steps before being summoned inside. The factory's pale dust still rides your cuffs, but the evening is already softening it into the rest of your life. When you reach your door, the shift narrows to a few ordinary acts. Boots are checked, the coat is hung, hands may be washed again because factory dust has a talent for reappearing. The lunch pail is set down. A chair receives the body's weight with a kindness that no machine has ever offered. For a few minutes you may say little, and that silence is understood. The day's story, if told, comes in small pieces. The sand was damp. The last batch went out clean. The soda ash barrel needs watching. The young helper missed cullet near the bin but learned to see it. These are not stories in the newspaper sense, yet they are the true stories of working life, where meaning often arrives dressed as a detail almost too ordinary to keep. Supper, lamplight, and household sound begin to replace the batch room. A fork touches a plate, a chair shifts, someone pours water. The room at home has its own smells, warmer than the works, with bread soap, coal heat, fabric, and perhaps the faint sweetness of something saved from market. Your hands, though washed, still feel slightly dry. They have spent the day among substances that take moisture from skin. Later, when quiet gathers more fully, the body may return to the factory and memory without intending to. You may see the scale beam settling. You may hear the sand pour. You may feel the small, cold bite of an iron weight lifted in the morning. These images are not troubling. They are slow and repetitive, and they pass through the mind like carts moving down a familiar corridor. Sleep comes not as a sudden curtain, but as a gradual lowering of tools. The batch room becomes dimmer inside thought. The bins soften into shapes. The ticket blurs. The scale rests level in the half-dream, no longer asking anything. Somewhere, beyond the sleeping worker, the furnace remains awake, turning measured powder into glass, and the city breathes around it under the dark. And when the next day comes, as it must, the 1910s Toledo glass batchware will return to the same plain miracle of beginning, where the work is not to shine, but to prepare what may one day shine after leaving his hands. That shine belongs to another room, another hour, and another pair of hands, yet the batchware's quiet portion remains inside it. You return before the light is fully lifted, and the plant receives you with its familiar mix of chill air, coal smoke, mineral dust, and the low living warmth that comes from furnaces never truly allowed to forget their fire. The batch room waits in its pale stillness, not empty exactly, but expectant, as if the bins, scale, scoops, and ledgers have been holding their places through the night so your hands can find them again. You set down your pail and touch the bench, because even without meaning to, you greet the room through the hand. The wood is cold along the edge and gritty where yesterday's dust has settled again from the air. The scale stands level and calm. The weights are in their row. The broom leans where it should. At once, before the first ticket is read, you know that the previous evening's closing care has travelled forward and become this morning's ease. There is a kindness in that, and a worker feels it more clearly than anyone looking in from outside. A room left confused makes the new day stumble. A room left ready lets the body enter the rhythm without friction. And in a 1910s Toledo glassworks, where so much depends on heat, timing, and the quiet faithfulness of repeated acts, a smooth beginning has real value. You don't admire it for long, you simply benefit from it and begin. The first batch ticket waits with its creases already pressed into it, and the handwriting seems a little darker in the weak morning light. You hold it close enough to read without leaning too far over the dusty bench. The amounts settle in your mind one line at a time: sand, soda ash, limestone, cullet, and the smaller things that must be respected because they are small. Your thumb marks the place, and your eyes return to the top. Reading twice is not delay. It is part of the weighing. The first reading tells you what is wanted. The second reading tells you that you did not merely imagine it. The formula belongs to the works, perhaps to office books and men who discuss melts in other rooms. But in this moment, the formula is yours to carry into matter. You fold the paper only slightly, set it where dust will not swallow the figures, and take up the scoop. The sand bin has a pale slope from yesterday's use. You enter it gently at first, then with more weight as the scoop fills. Grains crowd against the blade and settle into a mound. The first lift tells your shoulder how the day will feel. The sand is dry enough, perhaps a little cool, and it pours into the weighing box with that steady, whispering fall that has followed glassmaking across centuries, from small shops to larger factories, from hand furnaces to the great industrial rooms of Toledo. You watch the scale, not the beauty hidden in the sand. It is too early for that sort of thought, and the body is practical before it is reflective. The beam lowers, stops, and waits for more. You add another scoop, then another smaller one, and then the hand begins its more careful work. A final spill of grains from the scoop's lip. A pause. A settling. The pointer trembles and comes nearly true. Close is not enough when the ticket asks for exactness. You remove a small amount, then add back less than you removed, because the hand has learned its own corrections through long practice. There is a tiny satisfaction when the beam rests where it should. It is not excitement, it is alignment, a quiet click inside the mind. The first line is marked, and the morning has found its footing. The soda ash comes next, and the barrel lid resists briefly before lifting free. Powder clings to the rim in a pale crust. You smell the sharper dryness at once, the faint alkaline edge that seems to reach the nose before the powder has moved. The scoop enters with less grit than sand, more softness, more cling. It fills easily, but it does not behave exactly like the sand, and your wrist knows the difference before you think it. You pour with care. A white cloud rises, mild but insistent, and you turn your face a little to the side. The batchroom air accepts the powder and holds it in suspension, making the light visible in slow-moving sheets. You have learned not to fight this dust with sudden gestures. Suddenness only wakes it. Slow handling keeps the room calmer and keeps the morning from becoming harsher than it needs to be. The beam settles again. You mark the ticket. The pencil seems loud in the early hour, though it is only a scratch on paper. A helper passes behind you carrying an empty sack, and the sack makes a dry folded sound against his leg. He says nothing, and you say nothing, because the room is still in that first quiet stage where words feel larger than necessary. Work speaks enough for now. The limestone is cooler under the scoop, or so it seems. It has a duller presence, more chalk than bite, and when it falls into the box it lands with a muted softness. This ingredient steadies what soda ash would make too yielding, and though you may not frame it in the language of formal chemistry, you understand its function through the factory's long habit. Too little, too much, too damp, too uneven, and the glass later tells on the room. That is one of the truths you carry. Glass tells on everyone. It tells on the furnace, the batch, the heat, the timing, the tools, the cooling, and the handling. A flaw that appears at the end may have begun at the beginning, and a worker who weighs the beginning lives with that knowledge in a quiet way. It does not make him anxious if he is steady. It makes him attentive. The cullet waits with its little stored sounds. When you lift from the bin, the broken pieces settle and speak against one another, clearer than the powders, as if the room has briefly gained a small set of bells. Some pieces carry a greenish tint in their thickness. Others look nearly white at the edge. Dust dulls them all. You glance as you scoop, because every clean shard is useful, and every wrong shard asks to be stopped before it travels farther. A dirty piece appears near the top, caught with a bit of something dark along one side. You set it aside without irritation. The room has time for such correction. A good worker does not resent being asked to notice. The batch is better for the pause, and the pause is small enough to disappear inside the larger rhythm of the morning. You weigh the cullet, level it gently, and let the scale take its uneven burden. The mixture begins to gather in its appointed place, not yet mixed, but assembled, like several quiet voices waiting to become one low chord. Sand gives the greatest body. Soda ash gives its softening help. Limestone steadies. Cullet remembers previous heat and makes the furnace's work easier. The smaller additions, if present, enter with their own influence, modest in amount, yet never to be taken lightly. You move each measure forward, and the batch becomes possible. As the morning grows, the factory around you lifts into fuller sound. A door somewhere opens hard against a stop. A cart rolls over a seam in the floor. Voices pass, softened by walls and distance. The furnace side deepens its muffled breathing. You hear all this without being pulled away from the ticket, because after enough years in industrial rooms, a worker learns which sounds require attention and which may be allowed to pass like weather. The batch is mixed by turning, folding, and drawing the materials through one another until the separate measures lose their isolated edges. You take the shovel, and the handle fits into the known place in your palms. The blade enters the mixture with a rasp, then lifts weight that is both powder and broken glass. The first turn is heavy. The second finds the path made by the first. The third begins the quiet repetition. Lift, fold, settle, and turn again, but not as a chant, not as a sharp beat. It is more like breathing while walking. The batch shifts color by small degrees, the white and gray and glassy flecks becoming more evenly distributed. Dust rises, and the room smells more strongly of all its ingredients at once. Your shoulders warm. The chill of morning leaves your back. You keep your face turned slightly from the falling powder and let the shovel do its plain work. The helper watches and then takes a turn when needed. His first motions may be a little too energetic, throwing powder higher than necessary, and you let him work a moment before correcting him. A young man must feel the tool before instruction fully makes sense. Then you show him the lower motion, the fold rather than the toss, the way to move material without stirring half the room into the air. He tries again, and the second attempt is better. This is how knowledge passes in the batch room, not through speeches, but through adjusted motions. A hand placed differently on the handle, a reminder to let the scales settle, a warning to keep soda ash covered, a glance toward cullet near the footpath. These teachings are small enough to seem almost nothing, yet they are the fabric of competence woven thread by thread into a person who may one day stand where you stand. The mixed batch is moved towards its waiting place. A barrow receives it with a dull weight, and cullet clicks within the pale mass as it settles. The barrow handles are worn dark, and when you lift them, they press into the same calloused places as yesterday. Wheels complain softly over grit. The prepared material is not beautiful, not yet, but it carries within it the possibility of window light, table light, lamp light, and all the ordinary shining uses that glass will have when no one remembers this room. By now, the first clear shape of the day has formed. You are no longer beginning. You are inside the routine. The batch room has woken around you, and the work has drawn its circle. We remain beside you in that circle, close enough to hear the scale and smell the powders, but far enough to let the calm of repetition continue without being crowded. The 1910s Toledo glass batchware does not need an audience. He needs room to measure. A second ticket comes, similar but not identical. You read it, pause, and read it again. The difference may be small, perhaps a changed amount of cullet, perhaps a slight adjustment to the batch for the furnace's condition or the kind of glass required. Small differences are exactly where the tired or overconfident mind can slip. So you give the new paper the respect of being new, even when most of its words feel familiar. The day outside the windows becomes brighter, though the light is still filtered by dust and industrial weather. Toledo's sky in such a district may carry smoke from many stacks, and the light that reaches the batch room often seems handled before it arrives. It is not the clear light of open fields. It is working light, grey, useful, and softened by what the city is doing. It rests on the scale beam and turns the iron slightly dull. You begin again. Sand enters the box, the beam lowers, the scoop returns. Soda ash follows in a quieter stream. Limestone adds its pale steadiness. Cullet brings its faintly musical irregularity. The marks gather on the ticket. The process repeats, but each repetition has enough variation to keep the mind placed where the hands are. This is one of the secrets of calm work. It is steady without being empty. A visitor passing through might ask whether all days are the same. You might smile inwardly at that, because the answer is both yes and no. Yes, the bins, scale, scoop, tickets, and powders return. No, the sand's dryness changes, the cullet's cleanness changes, the furnace's needs change, the helper's attention changes, the weather changes, and the body itself changes from morning to morning. Routine is not sameness. It is a familiar frame around changing particulars. The soda ash barrel is lower now. You notice the change by the angle of the scoop and the deeper bend required. Low barrels make dust rise differently. They ask the back for a little more. You could ignore the discomfort, but your body stores every careless bend, so you shift your stance, draw the barrel slightly if allowed, and work with the kind of economy that keeps a man useful over years, rather than merely busy for an hour. Economy of motion is one of the oldest skills in any manual trade. It is learned slowly, often after fatigue has explained what pride refused to hear. The young use strength where the experienced use angle. The young lift quickly where the experienced slide, brace, turn, and let weight travel through the body in a kinder path. You may not say this aloud, but your movements teach it, and the helper's eye may catch more than his ear would. Near mid-morning, stock is checked again. You walk the bins, touching lids, reading chalk marks, looking at levels, feeling whether a sack seems damp or sound. The room is full of labels, but labels are only part of knowledge. You also read sagging burlap, crusted rins, powder on the floor, and the small trails that show where material has spilled or been carried on boots. The batch room is a text written in substances. At the cullet pile, you pause longer. Some pieces near the side look dirtier than you would like. Perhaps they came from a hurried sweep, or perhaps the sorting wasn't careful enough before they arrived. You call the helper over, and together you separate the questionable pieces. They make a sharper sound when dropped into the reject container. This is not wastefulness. It is protection. Bad cullet is never cheap if it spoils good glass. The helper asks whether one piece is clean enough. You take it, turn it in the light, rub its edge with a thumb, and decide. Clean enough is not a lazy phrase when spoken by someone who understands the standard. It means the piece has been judged for the use ahead. You return it to the good pile or set it aside, and the boy learns that judgment is often quieter than rules, though rules are needed too. Another cart passes the doorway, and the smell from beyond shifts briefly toward hot brick and furnace gas. The batch room seems cooler by comparison, though moments ago it felt warm. You stand in this exchange of climates, powder behind you and heat before you, and it becomes easy to feel the whole glassworks as one long movement from earth to fire to shape to cooling. Your part remains at the earthward end, among dry matter and measured beginnings. The work continues. The scale beam rises and falls. The pencil marks accumulate. The floor takes on fresh dust. Your sleeve grows paler. The room becomes busier, then settles, then busier again, following the demands of the furnace and the schedule of prepared batches. There is no single climax to such a day. There are only necessary completions, each one modest, each one feeding the next. When the noon pause approaches, you feel it first in the way men begin to finish small sections, rather than start new, uncertain ones. A worker knows the clock partly by appetite, partly by sound, partly by the behavior of others. You finish weighing the batch at hand because a half-finished measure is an invitation to confusion. Then you cover what should be covered, set down the scoop, and let your fingers straighten from their curved grip around the handle. The room softens around the pause. Tools rest where they have been placed. Dust settles more visibly when fewer bodies move through it. The scale stands unloaded and level, looking almost ceremonial in its stillness. You wash your hands in cold water and the water clouds at once. The sensation is sharp, then pleasant. It takes away the surface of the work, though not the memory of it. Lunch is eaten with the practical quiet of men who do not need each bite described. Bread, cheese, coffee, perhaps a small piece of meat or fruit, depending on the household and the week. Your hands, though washed, still smell faintly of the room when they lift the food. That is ordinary. Factory work joins the body so closely that separation is never complete in the middle of the day. A conversation starts near the wall, drifts, and fades. Someone speaks of a new machine installed in another department. Someone else doubts it will be as fine as claimed. A third man says, machines are all very well when they run, and no one argues too sharply because everyone has seen both the promise and nuisance of mechanisms. In Toledo glassmaking, change is not an idea in a newspaper. It is something that arrives with belts, gears, instructions, and altered habits. You listen while eating, thinking perhaps of the batch room's own mixture of old and new. The scale is old in spirit, even if its manufacture is modern enough. The formulas may be improved by experience and industrial science. The handling is still human. The bins and scoops belong to older worlds of trade, while the furnace and machines beyond speak of speed and output. Your job sits calmly between them, translating written control into material fact. After lunch, the afternoon opens with a slower hinge. The body would prefer a longer rest, but the room does not ask harshly. It simply waits. You return to the ticket, smooth it, and let your mind re-enter the sequence. Sand first if the formula says so. Then the other materials in their order: read, weigh, mark, move, and mix. The repetition does not push you awake. It draws you in. The first afternoon measure is often the most revealing. If the hand is clumsy, it shows. If the mind is wandering, the scale catches it. Today you feel the slight heaviness after food, so you move deliberately. The scoop fills. The beam answers. You wait longer than usual for the pointer to settle, not because the scale needs more time perhaps, but because you do. Patience can be adjusted like stance. A rain begins outside, light at first, barely audible against the industrial shell of the building. You hear it only when a doorway opens, or when the drops find a metal edge near the window. The damp air brings a new smell to the room. Wet brick, old wood swelling slightly, coal smoke pressed lower by weather. Dampness is not welcome among powders, but rain itself has a soothing sound when kept at the proper distance. You check the lids more often. Soda ash especially must be guarded. A careless open barrel in damp weather can make tomorrow's work troublesome, and the batch room has long memory for such neglect. The helper, seeing you check, checks too. This pleases you more than a spoken compliment might. A lesson has begun to take root when it appears without being requested. The rain darkens the high window. Light becomes flatter, softer, almost evening-like, though the day has not reached evening. The powder in the air seems more visible against the darker glass. Your hands move through that softened light, placing weights, lifting scoops and brushing the pan. The room feels enclosed, as if the weather has drawn a curtain around the factory and made the batch room a smaller, warmer world. The furnace side continues with its own weather, independent of rain. Heat remains, fire remains. Men working there may welcome the cooler outside air, but the melt itself cares little for drizzle on the roof. The batch you prepare will move from damp afternoon toward heat that erases dampness, shape, and edge. That contrast gives the day a quiet depth, rain at the windows and dry powder in the hands. Furnace heat beyond the wall. You prepare another batch and mix it thoroughly, giving extra attention to any material that may have begun to cling. Damp air can change flow even before it makes visible trouble. It can make powder slightly stubborn, less willing to fall cleanly from scoop or barrel. You tap the scoop lightly, not hard enough to raise a cloud. You scrape the side with practiced restraint. The material yields, and the measure is completed. Afternoon labor narrows the mind in a useful way. There is less room for stray thought now, not because the work is frantic, but because fatigue makes attention more precious. You keep it close. The formula, the scale, the texture of the material, the location of the helper, the path of the cart, the low stock in one bin, the covered barrel. These become the borders of your world, and within those borders, the work remains calm. A supervisor from another part of the plant may step in briefly, perhaps looking for the foreman, perhaps checking on a batch. His shoes carry darker grime, and his coat smells faintly of rain. He asks a question about readiness. You answer with the batch number and the state of the mix. He glances toward the barrow, sees the ticket, and nods. Such visits pass quickly. The room closes again behind him. The helper asks whether the rain will spoil anything. You answer honestly, not with alarm. It can, if things are left open. That is enough. Work often reduces worry by turning it into tasks. Cover this, move that, note the damp sack, keep the pathway clear, check the material before weighing. The world becomes manageable when concern is translated into action. The rain strengthens for a while, and the roof sound becomes a low, steady presence above the factory's other noises. It does not dominate. It blends. The batch room now has rain above, furnace breath beyond, powder at hand, and the soft scrape of the scale pan being cleared. The combination is strangely peaceful, because all of it is contained by routine. Nothing in it demands a raised voice. You weigh a smaller addition, and the scale's sensitivity feels almost intimate after the heavier materials. The amount is modest enough that the hand must become gentle. You add a little. Wait. Add less. Wait again. The pointer moves in tiny degrees. Outside, rain runs down the glass. Inside, a few grains or crystals decide the measure. Large weather and small weighing meet in the same afternoon. When the measure balances, you mark the ticket, and the pencil line feels like closure. You protect the small container, return it to its place, and look over the area for stray powder. A worker in such a room learns that the smallest materials often leave the most noticeable evidence if mishandled. A smear, a stain, a colored dusting, a sharp odor, a trace on the fingertips. You keep them contained because the batch depends on each material knowing its place. Later, the rain slackens and the room brightens slightly. The floor near the doorway shows a few damp prints from men who came in from outside. You sweep around them only when they dry enough not to smear. Wet grit behaves differently from dry powder, and the broom must wait or it only spreads the mess. This too is knowledge. Not all work should be done at the first possible moment. Some work improves by waiting until the material is ready to be handled. A batch is called for sooner than expected, and the room responds with steady purpose. The helper brings the barrow closer. You check the ticket, confirm the amounts already weighed, and begin the final measure. There is no sharpness in the request, but everyone senses the furnace's timing behind it. You move efficiently, not hurriedly. The scale still gets its full attention. The batch still receives its proper mixing. Calm speed is different from haste. The final shovel turns are deeper, making sure the lower material has not remained separate. Your shoulders work in a larger circle. The blade catches, releases, and lifts. Cullet clicks under the powder's hush. The mixture becomes even enough for the charge. You step back, breathing more heavily but quietly, and watch as the batch is taken away toward the furnace side. The doorway receives it, and the room feels briefly lighter. In that moment, you may sense how your labor has become part of an unseen flow. Material arrives, is measured, mixed, moved, melted, formed, cooled, inspected, packed, and sent out. Each stage touches the next, but does not entirely know it. The batch weigher knows the beginning better than anyone else in the chain. And the beginning has its own dignity, rooted not in display, but in readiness. The rain has left a cooler smell in the air by late afternoon. Wet brick and coal smoke linger near the doorway. Inside, the powders remain mostly dry, because you have kept them so. That is a successful afternoon, though no one will call it that. Success sometimes looks like nothing happening. No caking barrel, no spoiled batch, no mislabeled material, no wet trail across the floor where dry footing is needed. You make another note in the ledger. The rain is worth mentioning only if it affected stock, but the damp sack certainly is. You write carefully, keeping the page away from the dusty wetness near your cuff. The ledger receives the note without comment. Tomorrow, or a week later, someone may understand from that line why a certain bin required attention. A small note can save a larger confusion. The day begins to turn toward closing again, and the familiar end-of-shift order waits ahead. Yet because of the rain, the closing care is slightly different. Lids are checked twice. Sacks are moved away from the dampest place. A draft under the door is noticed, and perhaps blocked if that is the habit of the room. The batch weigher's responsibility extends beyond weighing into preserving the materials from quiet harm. You brush the scale carefully. Damp dust can cling, and clinging dust can become tomorrow's nuisance. The pan is wiped, the beam is checked. The weights are clean enough and returned in order. Your fingers feel colder now than they did an hour ago, because the weather has cooled the room while the work has slowed. You flex them once before lifting the next weight, and the joints answer with a tired stiffness. The helper sweeps near the door, and this time he waits properly where damp grit would smear. You notice and say nothing at first, because some praise is best given by not correcting. Then, when he has finished, you tell him that was the right way. The words are plain. He lowers his eyes and nods, but you can see that he has heard them. In a factory, approval is often brief, and for that reason it can last. The last prepared batch of the rainy day waits under cover. It will not sit long, but long enough. You touch the edge of the barrow, feel the dampness of the handle where wet hands may have held it, and wipe it with a rag before pushing. Small comforts matter when hands are already tired. The barrow rolls out, and its wheel leaves a darker track through a fine veil of floor dust. As evening lowers, the high window becomes a grey mirror again. Your reflection is dimmer than yesterday's, because rain has darkened the glass. You see the outline of cap, shoulder, and bent arm. You see not a heroic figure, but a working one, and that is enough. The batch room has shaped your posture for the day, and soon home will slowly unshape it. Records are checked, tickets are gathered, notes are added, the bins are settled. The floor is cleared enough for safe walking. The soda ash is covered against the damp night. The cullet is contained. The sand weights its surface, bearing soft scoop marks like shallow waves left after a tide. Everything has been handled, and everything has been left able to continue. At the basin, the water is colder after rain. It runs over your hands and carries away pale streaks, grey lines, and a faint gritty feeling that has lived on your skin since morning. You wash more slowly than before, perhaps because leaving in rainy weather asks the body to prepare itself differently. Wet streets wait outside. Damp cuffs, a cooler walk. The smell of the city after rain rising from brick, wood, horse traffic, and coal ash. You put on your coat, and it feels slightly damp from the room or from the weather carried in earlier. The fabric settles over tired shoulders. Your pail is lighter now. Your hands are cleaner, though not fully clean. The room behind you is quieted, and the rain outside has softened to a patient dripping along gutters and roof edges. You step toward the door, carrying the day as a weight that has become familiar enough not to need complaint. The yard has a washed darkness. Reflections tremble in shallow puddles. Factory windows glow in places, and their light breaks on wet ground in dull amber patches. Men move through that light with collars raised and hats low. You join them, and the glassworks remains behind you, still warm at its core, still making use of measured beginnings. The batch room is closed for you, but the batch itself is moving onward. Walking home in rain changes the memory of dust. The powder on your cuffs darkens at the edges. The soles of your shoes gather street mud over the pale mineral traces. The city adds its own layer to the factory's layer, and by the time you reach home, the day's substances have mingled with the weather. Work is like that. It is never sealed away completely from the rest of life. At home, the lamps are warmer than the factory windows. Wet clothing is hung where it may dry. Boots leave a darker mark near the door. The room smells of supper, damp wool, soap, and coal heat, a softer mixture than the batch room's minerals. You sit, and the chair receives not only your weight, but the whole accumulated rhythm of weighing, lifting, checking, and returning. The evening passes without needing to be eventful. A meal, a few words, perhaps a newspaper folded nearby, though the eyes may be too tired for much reading. Perhaps a child asking a small question. Perhaps the quiet of a boarding room, where other men also carry their shifts in silence. Outside, the rain continues or stops. Inside, the body's work begins to loosen. When sleep comes, it carries the rainy day's textures with it: damp brick, covered barrels, cold water at the basin, the scale pan wiped clean, the helper waiting properly with the broom, the sound of cullet under powder, bright and subdued, the batch travelling toward heat while rain tapped on the roof. These are gentle images, industrious but not urgent, and they drift through the mind until even the scale's pointer becomes a soft blur. And in the hidden hours, while the Toledo streets dry under clouds, and the factory fires remain tended by other hands, the measured batch continues its slow change, leaving behind powder, edge, and separate names as it becomes the glowing substance the day was quietly preparing all along.